Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Two Girls, One Garbage Can. This is part 2 in our 2019 election reflection episode, examining what went wrong for the Labor 2019 federal election campaign. Please check out part 1 if you have not already done so before jumping into this episode, as we will be diving straight in to the polling and what happened with Labor's polling numbers, and you will need a little bit of background information before jumping in to that one. As always, if you don't want to wait a week in between episodes, then you can join up to be a Ko-fi member. Ko-fi members get our episodes in one big block without the naughty bits taken out and receive bonus episodes just for Ko-fi subscribers. Ko-fi members who sign up for as little as $3 a month get all of these benefits, as well as additional benefits, including little special gifts that we make and send out for our little trash pandas. So if you would like all of those perks, or if you just want to stay in better touch with what we're up to, then please do jump onto our Ko-fi. We are also now over on Blue Sky. So if you would like to follow us outside of our podcast episodes, then please follow us over on Blue Sky at Two Girls, One Garbage Can. Thank you all so much. Now let's jump into the episode.
Previously on Two Girls, One Garbage Can.
Well, there are 3 factions within Labor, but there are 2 very distinct factions, the left and right faction. They kind of developed this big 7 who became in charge of making all of the decisions. From the time that the election was called until the election day, the election team that had been put together for the election did not meet once. So Noah Carroll, who was the ALP campaign director, had never run a federal campaign before. One of the staff from Bill Shorten's office was sent to attend the campaign management office where the campaign headquarters was, and reports from those who were present in the campaign office during this time stated that her job just seemed to be wandering around all day going, has anyone got a plan? Has anyone got a plan? And no one had a plan. One of Carroll's best qualities was his ability to collate and read through all of this information. Like he was really great at collecting all this information up, breaking it down, reading through it, and sort of figuring out what it all meant. However, he wasn't so great at actually giving this information to the leadership team. So Noah Carroll decided that rather than just having one group in charge of polling, which is what has been done traditionally with every single campaign ever, he was going to break the campaign polling into several different factions. Part of this was also because of the huge big issues within the ALP, being that Queensland Labor refused to work with New South Wales and Victorian Labor on anything. And so part of the breakup in polling was also because of factions within the party that made it really difficult for Carroll to get everyone on page together. But this basically meant that in the end, Noah Carroll had information from polling and things coming from 7 different sources. 7 different sources of information that he as the campaign director was receiving. Now, the way that this worked with, say, for example, the Liberal National Party was that they had one team that they hired who then collated all of this different information from everywhere, and then it was that person's job as the head of the polling office to jump on a Zoom call and explain all of it to the leadership team within the LNP.
Mm-hmm.
However, Labor, what they decided to do was Carroll collected all this information, and him as the campaign director, he tried to explain it to the leadership team. But the leadership team often couldn't understand what he was saying and had questions about the information that he then couldn't answer because it was information he hadn't necessarily looked into himself. I know, it's really frustrating, not just like losing your mind listening to all of this shit, isn't it?
Everything about this campaign, and as it seems, the Labor Party as it stands today, is that there is a catastrophic lack of communication or the ability to even communicate.
They aren't communicating at all is exactly the point. There is no communication happening within this party. That is what it comes down to in one word: communication. Why did Labor fail?
Mm-hmm.
Communication. 100%. And people wonder why I want to do live stream sermons for our political party every week. Communication, boys. It ended the fucking Labor Party.
Yep.
So he saw a need. So Noah Carroll saw a need to diversify information sources and make sure you weren't getting your information all from one place. But he wasn't the right person to be disseminating this information back to the leadership team or anyone within Labor, to be honest. It was like the information was being collected and it was just sitting there and nothing was being done with it. After the election, it was revealed that the ALP had Newspoll who do the polling that we get that tells us how things are going. We're also doing the polling for the Labor Party. Now, this is a massive conflict of interest. This is a massive.
So they were doing external and internal polling.
Yes. Now, the reason this is a massive conflict of interest is because if you, for example, wanted to affect the polling, you could simply tell the Australian public the polling was doing something different to what it was doing, and that could have an effect on the polling. So to have the same organisation doing the polling for the Liberal Party, the Labor Party, as was doing it for the Newspoll, like as Newspoll don't do it for the Australian public, shit, like should not be happening. That should not fucking be happening.
Yeah.
Because there are private organisations like Ray Morgan, Freshwater Strategy, they do it as well. Essential Resolve Strategy, I already said that. Newspoll, they were using fucking Newspoll. They paid like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for this polling that they had that they were doing by Newspoll. Newspoll have come out in a report. They have said that they were not using the same information to do both polling, which they absolutely should not be, because the way that your nightly polling is done on the news is they will call a location, they will call a seat that is like a marginal seat, they will ask certain questions in a certain way, and based on those responses, that is the polling you get on the nightly news. So it isn't really, it's a good indication of how people are feeling, because they generally try and get a wide screenshot of people, they try and get a wide disbursement of people within the community so that you're going to get a good idea of how people are feeling within that community. But it is not the same sort of rigorous opinion polling that is done when you are employed by an office like the ALP to go out there and do that polling. That is a lot more rigorous, a lot more involved. Okay. So they were saying there is no overlap. We are not using the same sources of information. It's completely different polling that's done. Cool. Awesome. Yep. I can see that. No problems. The problem is that because the ALP couldn't understand what they were being told in the opinion polling they were being showed by Noah Carroll, they just decided, well, we can just use what Newspoll are telling everybody because we're using the same fucking service, right? So we're fine. We're doing fine. Except if you actually look back at the Newspoll polling that they were given and you look through what they actually were being shown during the election, you can see that throughout the entire election, they were not doing well. They were polling behind constantly and they knew it. But they didn't know it. They didn't know what they knew because they didn't understand what they were reading.
Yep.
So as someone who does campaigning, looking at that, I was like, you guys are within the margin of error the entire fucking time. You are not ahead once. You are not ahead at all, not once, this entire fucking time. But they were talking and acting as though they were ahead because that's what the nightly news polling was showing them. The stuff that is based off ma and pa sitting on their couch overnight, your opinion, not based on what's actually going out in the community. So the idea that these quiet Australians is the reason that we won because the polling just wasn't reflecting what real Australians thought. Maybe people were lying to the polling. No, the polling that was actually being done showed that this was going to happen. It's just that the ALP weren't looking at the correct polling because they weren't understanding what they were reading. And so they were looking at the wrong information.
Yep.
Yeah. So today is a good one to just be listening to too, by the way, guys, because there's just a lot of like, what the fuck information coming out. And besides all of this, besides the polling, besides the miscommunication, there was another big impact on the 2019 election that we cannot forget. I know right now in hindsight, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but we all remember the Clive Palmer. We all remember what was happening. The reason I started on TikTok was because I was trying to explain to people how preferential voting actually works because of the Clive Palmer effect. The misinformation that was going on about voting and the voter farming that was happening through these how to vote cards was off the actual chain. Now, I don't want to. I'm going to give you a minute to react to this, and I'm going to mute myself so I can do a while you take it in, because you are going to blow your fucking mind when I tell you about this. All right. The ALP, the Liberal National Party, and the Australian Labor Party, the Liberal National Party, and Clive Palmer's United Australia Party combined spent a combined $120 million on election campaigning. Okay? So the three, Australian Labor Party, Liberal National Party, and Clive Palmer's United Australia Party combined spent $120 million on the election campaign. Clive Palmer's United Australia Party spent $80 million of that $120 million. Clive Palmer's United Australia Party outspent both parties combined, and during the same time period, they spent more on advertising than Macca's, Telstra, and any of the big banks. Just on that fucking election campaign.
And for it, they won one single seat.
No, that's not correct at all. I will tell you what they won.
Well, they influenced the rest of the election. Like, yes, they influenced the rest of the election. There was a whole other bunch of shit that went down, but the actual party itself.
Hang on, I gotta. Before you, I was going to say, just react to the spending rather than anything else. Don't react to the UAP, because I'm going to that part of it. I was going to say I'm going to blow your mind hugely in a second on that part of it again. Just focus on the money for now, because you're not even ready for the next part.
No worries. I'll play along. You do your belong. I'll do the good little monkey dance over here about the money.
Just wait till I tell you the next part about like. You just fucking wait, mate.
So, like, oh my god. Okay, so 120 million between the two majors and Clive.
Yeah, he didn't actually win a seat.
Yeah. So you've got that amount of money that's gone between those three parties, right? Clive has spent 80 of that 120 million, leaving approximately, if we're going to average it out, $20 million for each of for LNP and Labor, right?
The two parties actually had money.
They have spent sorry, dude, when I'm talking, I have to mute my headset, so I couldn't hear anything you were saying.
All good.
Sorry, buddy.
No, all I said was literally the only two parties that actually have money to spend, and he outspent them by 4 times the amount.
Yeah. And that right there is a prime example for why we should not follow the same route that the Americans have. We should not allow businessmen to come into politics in this country while they have ongoing major business concerns that can be impacted or affected by policy changes. Now, I realize in saying that's one of the most ridiculous things I could possibly say in my life, because like 80% of sitting house politicians at the moment are fucking landlords, and all of their decision making around housing is impacted based on their property portfolios. So saying that we shouldn't allow businessmen to come in and affect politics is a bit of a leap when you consider that we already have people who have businesses that politics impacts. But I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Yeah. So like, the fact that this dude can come in and drop $80 million, and as Tamara said, that's more than the amount of money that was spent by any of the banks, by Macca's, by Telstra, by any of the big companies.
Here's the really, really interesting thing about Palmer's big spend. Palmer was pretty much the only reason that the LNP was able to hang on to its vote share. The coalition's primary vote actually went backwards during the 2019 election.
Hmm.
The coalition had less of the primary vote than it has ever had at an election before. However, the same was true of Labor. Neither of the major parties has managed to get more than 30% of the primary vote in the last 4 elections.
Mhm.
Since Kevin Rudd, Labor hasn't got above 30%. During this particular election, 2019, Labor had its lowest primary vote since the 1930s.
Yep.
What this shows us is that more and more Australians are understanding how preferential voting is working, and the two major parties are receiving less of the primary vote than ever before. However, there are certain areas in which the vote share is increasing for the two major parties. For Labor, the share of the primary vote is increasing with college-educated white men, i.e. those who are concerned primarily about ensuring their economic prosperity historically.
Mhm.
These are the sorts of people who historically would have been seen as more conservative voters and the sort to vote for the LNP, for example.
Yep.
The Liberal National Party. With the Liberal National Party, their primary vote share has increased with the same sort of
With
people
racists.
who used to be Labor voters. That of blue-collar workers in the outer suburbs, often uneducated.
My point still stands.
The very people whose policies were designed to assist. These people tend to vote for One Nation or the United Australia Party.
My point still stands. Sorry, 2 on the nose.
Just like, I can't believe you said it before I even said the rest of it.
Hey, I know what's happening, man.
I knew you'd jump in with racist at some point. I just wasn't expecting it. So
I fucking had to.
what I said.
Yeah, damn right I said what I said. I know what I'm about.
But this also shows us, interestingly, the changing in the policies as they change with the demographics of Australia. And I do think it's very interesting that we've seen these two parties shift to such an extent that they are really mirroring the Democratic Party in the US and the Republican Party in the US as they currently stand. But it seems a lot more hidden. Like, it doesn't seem to be as obvious to people until you start looking at who is voting for who.
Yep.
And then you can see it very clearly.
It's becoming far less hidden currently if you listen to the rhetoric of Dutton.
Yes.
He is importing US-style wedge identity politics issues.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Losing the 2019 election may have been the happiest accident that ever happened to the Australian Labor Party.
Really?
Because they got to be in opposition during COVID. They didn't have to be the face of the COVID and pandemic response. They didn't have to be the rollout during all of the shit that happened. They got to sit in opposition and exclusively critique rather than actually having to act. So it may have been one of the happiest accidents that ever happened to them in modern day politics.
On Saturday, May 18th, 2019, the Australian Labor Party asked the Australian people to put their trust in us to govern the country, and they chose not to do so. Those were the opening words of the review of Labor's 2019 federal election campaign. And there are some very interesting findings in it that you can kind of look at. One of the things that the Labor Party sort of said that I did think was very interesting was that around the world, polls reveal declining trust of politicians and political institutions. Contributing to this collapse have been political scandals, deal-making between politicians and large businesses, the global financial crisis and its recessionary aftermath, and the conspicuously extravagant lifestyles of highly wealthy at a time when the wages of most workers have been stagnating. All of this is still exceedingly true. None of this has changed. In fact, most of these things have gotten worse. And yet it seems as though our satisfaction with democracy has declined since these results came in. there is a very clear signal that is being sent to our government, both with the drop in the primary amount of the vote they are getting, with the number of people who are showing up to protest these issues. Our satisfaction with our democracy and our democratic process has only decreased as we have seen more restrictions be placed on those who are protesting, more like people being arrested for protesting, the way that protesters are being treated. We are in a civil war. If people don't realize that we are in a civil war at the moment because they allow us to go to a box and put our number in a piece of paper every 3 years, when we have people who are being shot, I don't care whether it's rubber bullets or not, they are being shot with armaments. They are being attacked by the armed wing of the state in the streets for protesting, for trying to have their voices be heard, by a government that didn't receive the majority of the vote, by a government that has
who
not
refuses to work with anyone,
vote, refuses to work with anybody else in government despite the fact that they did not get the majority of the vote.
cracks the shit, refuses to do anything or collaborate with any other political party who would get their actions over the line, and instead turns to their mates in the media and goes, oh, you need to run a story about how these shitheels are blocking us from doing the thing we want to do, regardless of the fact that we didn't campaign well enough to get the majority so that we could pass the things we want. And now, instead of actually making deals to collaborate between parties and make things happen, instead we're just going to throw a fucking massive hissy fit anytime anyone says, actually, no, we're not doing anything with you until you give a bit of ground our way.
And I'm sorry, but Penny Wong, I fucking hate the Greens. I have ragged on the Greens more than anyone you will know. Find a Greens voter who hates them more than me. I will pay you. And I still, when Penny Wong wanted to turn around and tell Adam Bant to grow up, I was like, you fucking grow up. You're the one who keeps grabbing your toys and leaving the sandbox because you don't want to play the same game as the other kids rather than compromising. Like, you fucking grow up. You didn't get enough votes. You didn't get enough to have majority. You have to work with these people because we don't want you having power, and you're not going to get it again after you've behaved like this, motherfuckers.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's dive into the depths of the trash fire that is Australian politics. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, make sure to drop us a follow and do all the usual engagement things to help us get the word out there. You can find Tamara and myself on the social media links in the description below, but for now, it's garbage day, so the girls gotta take the trash out. Bye.
Bye.